Hey, I love that intro. I feel like I'm entering a club.
Right? Am I not so fancy? I mean, it only took like 40 episodes for me to get there.
Wow. Yeah, I was
But
wondering. I was like, how much time did that take? God.
more than I will admit on a live recording. But I also did one for the Unqualified series. I don't know if you caught any of that. And I was like finishing it up right before we went live, and then it did weird things. So I was super excited when this one played, and nothing weird happened.
Yeah. No, that was incredible.
So welcome to the show, everyone. This is Kyle. He does really cool things in project-based learning. So if you hear PBL kind of mentioned throughout the thing, that's what that means. You're welcome. Acronyms are hard. Um, but we have you back in the States because you hang out in Hong Kong, right?
Yeah,
Which is pretty cool.
brief hiatus. I'm usually in Hong Kong. Rare time you caught me.
Yeah. So I love kind of the work that you do. I've been following you on LinkedIn and kind of watching some of the cool stuff that you do. And when we first tried to connect, we had a time zone thing and there were situations, and then we finally got it worked out. And then I was like, well, we're going to talk about PBL. And then yesterday I was like, what do you want to dive into? And you had this whole other layer of like civic and community engagement inside of PBL. And I have to tell you, I'm so freaking excited.
Yeah.
So fill in some more of your info. Tell us about you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll start the story of where I got really hooked on project-based learning. And that was back at a little school that was down the street from where I was at. And I went in, and it was a hiring day, and it's unlike any kind of hiring practice I ever had. So I was a potential teacher, potential candidate, and I went in for this bonanza. And the bonanza looks like you basically go in, you get interviewed by a bunch of students. The students look like they run the school. You see students all over. They're not just confined in these classrooms. They're moving in and out of classrooms fluidly. And the teacher usually is, hard to find in the classroom. They call them facilitators. And some of the things these kids were doing amazed me. I mean, the kids were designing apparatuses to get from across this local small body of water outside of the school, and designing like submersive apparatuses to do that. Some students were designing and writing their own books for like local flora and fauna guides for the city. Some working with the Oceanography Institute locally on putting sensors in the buoys to track ocean currents. And these students are like 12, 13. So I was like, wow, I want to make this magic happen. And I got a chance to work there. That little place is called High Tech High, for those who might know about it. It's world renowned, and made it my life's mission from there to really serve people and helping design these kind of experiences. And now I call myself a co-learning experience designer, helping schools to do this kind of work and create these kind of citizens.
Yeah, because I mean, co-learning experience designer is like all the perfect adjectives for, the work of coming alongside a learner and partnering with them to build whatever it is, like to bring these experiences to life and the experience they learn from. Like, it's really fantastic. Perfect words. Great word use. I mean, you know that, but it was great.
Well, it took a long time to get there. And I think it was a shift in my mind because when you first start, you're a teacher, right? And they call you a teacher, and you have your content, and you stand up in front of the classroom, and you're supposed to be this kind of expert. And we don't really live in that kind of age anymore.
Right.
Expertise is an old dying term. And really the only way to be effective is get in the ring with the learners themselves. So that's why.
For sure. Yeah, I have that. I love having that conversation with educators, and I've had that conversation on both sides, right? So I kind of refer to it as the ego of the educator, and how that gets in the way of these types of mindset shifts between being the teacher to being the facilitator. And like you were saying, the teacher in our minds like stands up in front and presents this content, and they essentially like hold the keys to whatever the learner needs to learn, and they'll pass on these keys. But in my experience, in the conversations that I've had, maybe similar to yours, I'd love to hear, like we were seeing that shift from I hold all the information and I will pass this along to you, to where students don't have to come to teachers or schools to get this information. They can get it it's readily available from the world around them. So now a great role that I'm seeing facilitators step into is like, let me help you kind of filter this information. Can I help you use what you're hearing and kind of separate the good from the bad? And then what does it look like to take that and put it into experiences? I don't
Yeah.
know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, it's precisely right. And I think, the best thing that we can offer now is not teaching the content, it's facilitating the experience. And
Yeah.
whether that means helping, the learner to organize information necessary to answer some kind of big question, whether it's finding their kind of personal interest or passion. And I feel like projects are the best context for that. And we constantly engage in projects outside of school, but yet school looks nothing like the real world. So, a project
Yeah.
that you're running right now, I'm sure, you've had to come up with this whole, your brand, your logo, your design, filling in, doing things on LinkedIn. I guess this whole intro video that you created was a project in and of itself. And
So many projects.
and so, you've gotten to that point probably, and I'm sure there's probably been people who have helped you along the way. I know for myself and starting this. So if we can structure, I think, school to be more centered around the learning experience and make it really real and valid and authentic to the learners themselves, then we can step into that role of helping them to access content that already exists and maybe ask the right questions, connect them to the right people. But then we are just kind of like behind the scenes. I call it like Wizard of Oz. We are behind the scenes creating helping co-design the experience, and they're kind of filling it in.
Yeah. And what's been interesting for me, like in this whole, like I was a director for my whole career up until August of 2020 when my school shut down and I shifted into this role, right? And it was a whole project-based learning experience, right? And what I ended up doing was getting coaches for different things like business coaches or mindset coaches or whatever that I needed to kind of fill in and help facilitate that for me. And it was kind of cool because I was kind of put in the place of the learner working with this coach who wasn't saying, here's the steps to take, do exactly this. It was rather like asking me questions and helping me get to the outcome that I was looking for. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of interesting to get to be on the learner side of that thing. But I would love to hear you kind of address this thought here. Getting with learners does not preclude mastery of content. And also the follow-up of children being in school is the real world. So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that mindset.
I would first love to hear the phrase mastery of content, what that means. I've yet to meet a mastery of any content.
Correct. Yes.
I don't like the word mastery for that reason. I don't think you ever reach that. I think you reach different levels of understanding and content, but never mastery. So first addressing that, I think that happens, more naturally through a project. And if we're talking about mastery of content, I mean, I can sit and do 1,000 calculus problems out of a textbook. And, what does that mean when I can do all levels advanced? Or I go through Khan Academy, an online program for math, and then I get to the mastery level. What's next? And I think the thing with projects is you're not necessarily trying to reach mastery, but you're using the content in a real context. And so it's never necessarily mastery. And I think if we focus just on mastery of content, we're looking at things in a very isolated situation. We're looking at just the subject lens. Like you just described your project in developing this business, after you kind of left the teaching world, or anyone, it's the content is just very fluid and it's, cross-curricular. And you're never like, I need to master business. I need to master this. It's like, no, I actually need to learn this for what I'm trying to do. And the person who made the comment of, well, school is real world for kids. Well, sometimes you can enter a boring office job and that's a real world for you, but it doesn't mean you can't.
Right.
You can't really prescribe to make it look more like the real world. Schools are actually not the real world. They're artificial. They've been constructed to control, and that's how they were started back in the industrial age. And to produce widgets and produce factory line workers. And so that's not natural. It's real in the sense of that's what kids do now. They go to school, but COVID has shaken that up. Let's talk more about learning, like that's more real because kids don't go into school now just to learn.
Right. Yeah. And I think, both of your points resonate highly with kind of my understanding and my mindsets on these things. Right. And we talk about a lot is there is no mountaintop. right? Because the world is always evolving, research is always evolving, like everything is always evolving. So especially in like my field specifically is child development, the research is shifting and changing every year as it should. So if I got my degree in child development in 2015 and then was like, I've mastered this, I no longer need to participate in it, like I'm going to be outdated in a year or less, right? So I agree that this concept of mastery doesn't really define this type of learning. I guess I could master second grade math, but I don't know, second grade math as it is now is not the same as second grade math as it is when I was in second grade. So still this concept of mastery doesn't really work. And I think as far as school being the real world, yes, it is their reality because they have to see it, interact with it every day. But as you were saying, like it is an artificial reality created for this purpose, and then they're put inside of it. So I don't know. I think those are interesting mindset comments about kind of learning and what that looks like and feels like. And then, yeah, Angela says project-based learning allows so much flexibility for learning across all areas. That cross-curricular piece that you were talking about. Sorry, I cut you off. What were you saying?
No, that's fine. But I think you gave a great example. I think we need to shift the language less around mastery. We can maybe talk about mastery of skills. And I think those skills, even the mastery of skills of adaptability, and agile thinking. I mean, we've seen with this age, because the mastery piece is not something that anyone, even on the top 10 list of future skills, and they're always changing this, but I've never seen mastery of content knowledge listed as one of those top 10. It's flexibility, creativity, innovation, collaboration. Right. And if we focus on more the mastery of those skills, the content becomes fluid within that, because if you know how to learn, that is going to serve you a lot better. And you can cross into new fields, as you mentioned. If you become outdated or you become obsolete in your particular profession, then all of a sudden, you can adapt. But if you are a master of that content knowledge and suddenly a computer or a program is taking that over, what do you do now? So same way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're kind of pushed off to the side. So, I mean, I think we agree on those concepts around, what the value of project-based learning, I guess, would be that conversation. But I'd love to kind of dig in what you had expressed about how PBL can interact with creating learners who are more engaged in like civics in their community and those types of things. So like, first tell me, how did you get to the point, or what was your experience to the point where you were seeing PBL kind of be a rocket for learners engaging in these types of social justice and civics and those types of things?
Yeah, well, I mean, I first saw it at High Tech High when I started, and it's a school that's dedicated around this kind of learning methodology, and so they don't. I'm not saying every project does this. Some projects are very kind of teacher focused, but the ones that you did see that did that, they engage naturally in the community and are addressing these issues. So the starting point for the design of learning started with the community. So in our case, when I went out to China and Beijing, immediately what we tried to do is work with the kids and identifying, well, what are some big community issues? What are some things that are in your world? What are some things in my world? Where those kind of things overlap? What are things in our community's world? And let's kind of design some projects around that. So one example is we addressed the local water quality. And we were looking at this local river that was highly polluted, and the kids lived right next to it, and the school was right next to it as well. And the big question became, well, what's causing this, and what can we do about it? And that launched into the learning, the investigation. They knew at the end they're going to produce some kind of innovation or proposal. That's what was driving the project-based experience. But we didn't know exactly what that would be. And then, if we fast forward to the end of that project, you got students standing up to the community that they've already engaged with in multiple points throughout the project, and they're sharing some of their potential solutions. One was looking at some toxic-free dyes, toxic-free cosmetics. That's was something she was very interested in, so it connected to her passion or interest. Another student was interested in looking at those local flower shop, and the local flower shop presenting some more biodegradable ways in which they could hold their plants. And so every kid had a different solution. They were engaged in the community around a big question, and it naturally, project-based learning allows for that, and then the content is infused within that.
Yeah. So would it be would these projects that were taken on inside of that brought up by the students as their interests within the community and then addressed inside of it? How did they kind of get chosen, I guess?
Yeah. So I would say if you're new to project-based learning, which some people who are tuning into this might be, I would say it's if you have experience where you run things where it's completely open and kids can choose whatever they want and you don't have any content or curriculum to cover, do it that way. And I've seen programs, I talk about a program that does that. If you do have content to cover, it's trying to allow for finding that thing that interests kids on a collective level, at least in your class, finding a question that's going to engage them. And then them attaching their own personal projects around that bigger question. So in this case, that big question was kind of set. Of course, it was arrived upon based on, observing what students were talking about. But then that allows, at least for planning purposes, when you're working across different subjects, of being able to say, okay, here's where potential content I have to teach can fit in. Because at the end of the day, as teachers, you are beholden to your content. You're being assessed on that. Students are, and you can't just say we're going to throw away our entire subject, right? And the great news is, especially if you're listening to this, the great news is they're going to need your content. Now, we say mastery of content. Well, they're going to need to go deep into your content to answer that question. So we don't just say, have at it, kids. What are your solutions? Well, that investigation into water quality is going to involve a lot of, very complicated science that they're going to have to understand. When it comes to the interviewing and taking from the community, we brought in local anthropologists, who were able to really help them with designing these kind of interviews and looking at bias and how that might affect them. So it is the need for the content to do that, rather than just saying, hey, what problem do you want to tackle? I'll support you. Everyone goes off in different directions. So.
Yeah. And I know you spent some time talking about like the concept of deep learning. I'd love to hear kind of how those two things, these projects that they're working on and this concept, kind of correlate to each other.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, a deep learning as opposed to breadth is that you are taking either a topic or a subject or a problem and you are spending and dedicating time to it, right? Like deep learning happens, especially outside of school, when you're deeply in a flow state, you're focused, and you are spending a long period of time on it. What we do in school is we say, okay, we're going to learn for 60 minutes. Now shut that off. Now go into the next subject. Now shut that off. Now go to the next subject. They're disconnected. Each teacher has a different expectation. We're playing a game. And then we get in the real world that doesn't have our time as, as closely allocated as it does in school. And suddenly we're supposed to, function in that kind of realm. So deep learning is taking one particular subject topic, in this case, I think, say a project, and really going in depth in terms of the investigation, understanding, and multiple opportunities for feedback that students are going to need to get to whatever that kind of goal is. And that goal is constantly shifting, because the more information you get, the more you know, the more that can,
right. There is no mountaintop.
There is no mountaintop. And some people say, what's your mountaintop? What's the final experience that they're going to get to? Right. Well, there's no mountaintop, and we got to get away from that mastery. It's like, if we get away from the mountaintop, we can stress that process is way more important than our
process over product. That's the kind of, and like we were talking about at the beginning, that's a shift in mindset, because so often we're saying, this is the product we're looking for, and then we work backwards from there, when this mindset is, we do have a product in mind, a question that we're looking to answer, but it's a bit more ambiguous than, the final goal. And then we kind of value the process in between. And then also it allows for, to divert, right? So if you're looking for this and then you discover something inside of over there, then you can kind of divert your research to kind of follow different paths. And to me, my background a lot is early education, right? So I love birth to 8. They turn 9 and I'm like,
that's when you come over to me at that point. That's what I want.
Yeah. I just pass them on to other people, right? But this has kind of been a thing that is allowed in early education, or has been accepted a lot sooner, because we just assume that this concept of wanting to follow your interests is because the child can't regulate their response, right? So I'd love to hear kind of your thought on that, because I've heard some shade thrown at this PBL learner driven concept and saying that's acceptable in early education for a child to be discussing, I don't know, something in morning meeting about a butterfly, and they see a car out of the window, and then the conversation shifts to how is that car running, and then the engine, they talk about the tires and allowing them to go that way. That's acceptable in early education because they don't have the self-regulation skills to, control that. Okay. And so I'm hearing that being put on PBL, right? Well, we can't follow the interests and the passions of the learners because we need to teach them self-regulation. So tell me about that.
So I guess the question being, we start to put confines more in terms of like the parameters that we place around students that are older than 8, as opposed to when they're younger, we're able to let them divert their attention more. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, I got distracted. Aldo was calling you qualified, super qualified. I don't know if you've seen any of the unqualified series. We just kind of talk about how we're unqualified to do what we do, and you are super qualified. So
great. I'm not an expert though. Qualified sounds better.
Yeah. Okay, ask me again. I'm paying attention now.
Well, I think I understand the gist of the question. I mean, the gist of the question is no, we can't let students follow their interests, and like divert away from that because they don't necessarily have the self-regulation skills to be able to do that. And, maybe the learning starts to get a little bit more confined as students get older, as opposed to you're mentioning when they're younger, we let them divert. They see a butterfly, then they see a car, and, their minds are able to shift and go to different places, and you're able to support them. So I would say that's, absolutely true. We tend to, try to constrict learning in the learner's mindset. We put packets in place. We put entire guides, and we say, students, you're going to do this, then you're going to do this, then you're going to do this, then you're going to do this. When the natural process of learning is divergent. It's not convergent. Initially it's very divergent. It's making connections in multiple different areas, and somehow you do converge those. If there is some kind of confine, like, hey, you got 6 or 8 weeks, or hey, at the end you're going to be presenting this or that. That's when it starts to converge. But I think it's quite important, regardless of the age, because I've seen it done with students as young as 4, as old as, at least what I've worked with, as old as college age, and even, beyond. We're constantly, this is the way in which we learn. And, projects can be the vehicle that help drive that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's been an interesting conversation that I've had with people to kind of hear their mindsets on it, of really, I guess, less necessarily project-based, but more learner-driven. Like if we follow the student, then are we, if we follow them and they say they want to do dinosaurs, and then during that conversation, they kind of shift over to focusing less on dinosaurs, living dinosaurs, and focusing more on fossils, right? And we allow them to make that type of shift, then that would assume a lack of executive function because they couldn't stay focused on that one and they decided to shift to the other. I disagree that, the want to kind of shift your focus some would be a lower executive function, and rather, you're following curiosity and allowing yourself, there is no mountaintop, allowing yourself to kind of shift as you go. But I guess inside of learner driven, there have to be some boundaries, I guess, to get you to a certain place.
Yeah, I would say those boundaries. So, I guess the point you're trying to make is some people would say, hey, this kid has a lack of executive function. They constantly get off task. They're re-diverting their attention. We need to stick with one thing. And I think what you're saying is that that's not necessarily showing a lack of executive function. It's showing flexible thinking. I think we need to see where flexible thinking and also extreme focus come into play. Like I mentioned, divergent and convergent. You have to know enough about a topic to start converging and saying, here's what I want to do with it. What that topic is. And so I think we allow that to happen. We allow the flexible mindsets to happen. We allow them to go on, several different pathways, and we help, them converge. And I always say that the metaphor to me is like bumpers in a lane. If you're bowling and you have bumpers in your lane, you never bowled before, and you've got it wide open. Yeah, you'll probably learn eventually to hit those pins, but you're going to experience tons of frustration thrown in the gutter every single time. And you actually might go away from bowling and be like, this sucks. I don't want to do this again.
Yeah.
Bumpers.
I've never done that.
Yeah, never. We're all professional bowlers. But, you put some bumpers in the lane. You allow students and people to experience some success. And maybe there are some parameters initially. But then I think the more experience you have with that, the same way in which us as adults have to have experience focusing as well. We need some experience in dealing with, one kind of particular topic, whether that's business or engineering or whatever that is. And then once the bumpers, we've really got accustomed to using those bumpers, and that's parameters sometimes a teacher puts in place within a project. Well, then we start opening up and making it, hey, completely wide open. You can go anywhere you want. But I think it's very important for students to experience success. And I've seen a lot of teachers try to open up the bumpers and say, here's your project, or actually there's no project. You guys can do whatever you want. Let's just explore it, what you're interested in. And I've seen lots of teachers experience a lot of failure with that and then say, hey, project-based learning doesn't work because there was nothing they're exploring a deep dive into. It was too wide open.
Yeah, because like you were saying, and this is a kind of a big point for me, is like the opportunity for the learner to experience success. And if there's no definition of success, however concise or vague, then you don't know when you're experiencing success. And so, what's encouraged gets repeated, so that the learner has to experience some type of success to then feel that, confidence grow, and then they repeat it and repeat it. So I think that is part of all of this, is kind of a balance between there are no rules and there are all these rules, and there has to be some type of definition of what success looks like, feels like, so that they can have that experience and keep moving forward. Like the bumpers, hit the pins. Yeah. That's success.
And I guess for people listening to this too, I think that's why project-based learning has been a tried and true methodology, because there are some parameters that are put in place in all great projects where you have kind of this big kind of inquiry that's driving it. You have a potential outcome that you're trying to reach, and you don't necessarily know what that's going to be to meet that outcome, right? But you just let's just take this whole topic of, global warming, for example. This is a real problem. Let's take this whole topic of COVID or social distancing. There are parameters put around that. Like, this is a big kind of topic. Yes, we're going to explore it in many ways, but our outcome is going to be, let's teach people potentially how to be safe from COVID. Okay, well, that becomes the large kind of topic, the big question. And you don't know exactly what kids are going to come up with, but let's say you give them 6 to 8 weeks and you have some milestones that you've set in place. You have them have some conversations. You have some lessons or mini workshops that you're teaching along the way. You have them look at what is real information and how do we determine what's real and what's fake. And at the end, you're going to come up with your solution. So these are some of the parameters you put in place. That's project-based learning, kind of 101. You got your driving question. You've got some kind of product kids are going to produce. And especially when it's publicly shared. If it's publicly shared, it puts another level of onus on them, because if they're going to share it with a community, with some kind of expert, whoever it is, parents, then all of a sudden they're going to feel a little bit more focused, I guess, when it comes to answering that kind of question, because they really want to come up with, an answer.
Yeah. So, when we were kind of talking, you brought up some pretty big concepts, right? Racism, misinformation due to around COVID, social justice concepts, those types of things. Like, tell me more about how how PBL plays into these really big concepts. We've kind of touched on that, but I'd love to hear more specifically about these concepts we were talking about.
Sure. So, one school is around social justice, and we obviously know social justice is a large topic and is definitely a large problem, especially as we see it really highlighted here in the United States. And the big question kind of became around social justice and laws, and looking specifically at how laws have been either unfairly written in the way that it just is naturally racist, and it's preclusive to certain groups of people. And that's a great way to really pull back the layers and see, okay, where is this coming from? Where are these laws? Who wrote these laws? Where are they appropriate? How do laws even get written or made? And then students go through this whole process, and they go through the whole lawmaking process themselves and go through the whole simulation, and then make suggestions on how to potentially improve laws. And make be able to go down to when the local city hall or their meeting and be able to share and go to some of these open session meetings. But this is a way of kids addressing issues of social justice. There's definitely a topic that's involved, and there's some milestones that they're moving along the way. So that's, in relationship to social justice. When it came to COVID, I saw one school just said, hey, you got a week. We're going to take it off the timetable. We're in virtual learning mode. Tests are done. Here's a couple prompts, and this is high school. And, have at it. And one it had to do with, in terms of COVID, like how do we basically ensure that people are getting the right information in our community and help best support people. And, students did everything from looking at actual like propaganda campaigns and more positive propaganda campaigns to artwork and putting murals up to running PSAs. But really, I mean, students come up with multiple products, and that's addressing a real issue. And I call that project-based learning because, you're really learning through that project. Some very, very important skills, of course, but really serving your community in a great purpose.
I love that. It's not just kind of the intake of information, but it's also kind of the consumption and then the impact. Like you're using that to kind of bring a positive impact into the people around you. And what I was thinking as you were talking about, especially kind of in the social justice piece about the laws that are written and, them kind of digging into them, is how different that is from the traditional experience. Because in a traditional experience, you're just told, here's what the laws are, here's the history, memorize that, and we'll test you on it, right? And in this experience, it's here's what they are, and then this space is created to allow for questions to be asked, like clarifying questions, or not just this is the law, but that's interesting, I have a question about this, or how did this get to this point, or what are some other layers of that, and the ability to kind of question authority. I mean, like have a respectful dialogue about things that are happening in the world, I think is a huge skill that a lot of us are missing. So like that piece right there, like the ability to build a respectful dialogue and to ask questions still in a respectful way, like how much do you see that tied back into, PBL projects?
Yeah, I think the best projects, it's built right from the beginning. The question is what's driving the learning, right? Now you might start with a topic and you might say, hey, it's social justice. What are some issues that you see coming up, kids, around social justice? So that's inquiry right away. When you have a particular topic, and they might bring up, okay, these unjust laws, or they might look at the city in terms of like economic inequalities, all these kind of things. They might see these kind of themes in the music that's being expressed. They might want to explore hip hop or whatnot. So you see that if the teacher takes kind of this curious mindset towards the topic and lets students kind of ask the questions and takes a back seat, then you see that in PBL happen right away. Now, I always say that the difference between inquiry-based learning and PBL is because I think inquiry-based learning is a gigantic circle where it's like you can ask anything about anything, and here's a topic and let's just explore it while inquiry. I think project is what drives like a central inquiry, right? So you might have a topic like social justice. How do we create more social justice for people? And that's a big kind of inquiry question. And there's this huge, kids are exploring from all different angles, as I mentioned to you. But then there's a project that helps drive it so that students are going really deep and able to produce something that has a tangible kind of result to it. We know not all projects have a great tangible result, but it's definitely a way to drive this inquiry into like action. So I think of like inquiry as a starting point, and then PBL just drives things to action.
Oh, I like that. I don't think that's not really a conversation that I've had or even a thought, like the difference between inquiry and PBL. That's super interesting. I love that you brought that up. So kind of the last big thing that I want to touch on inside of PBL. So anytime that we're bringing up these big concepts, racism, COVID, laws and inequality, etc. We all come in with our bias and our defenses and, you know, our feelings and emotions and all those types of things right into the conversation. So my assumption would be that, especially, you know, the older the students, the deeper the conversations are going to be, as well as the deeper their bias and things like that is going to be, because they've had certain experiences. What do you see in the way of like creating a space, creating psychological safety within the space for the students to be able to really engage in those types of deep conversations with others, where they could be, you know, there could be offenses or miscommunications and those types of things? Like, how is that mitigated or managed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because if you don't have it, you can't dive into any of these projects or topics,
Right.
especially one as sensitive as this. And I think that goes back to, you know, what any classroom, regardless if you're doing projects or whatnot, how do you build trust? You know, and how do you build trust with anyone? You're building trust with your learners, and a way to do that is creating this safe place by, you know, you're a very stickler with working with the kids on, we do have norms as we are discussing some of these things. I think protocols are incredibly important. You know, I'm a huge fan of protocols, and a lot of those protocols have to do with the way in which we address a topic. So when we're having a discussion, is there a protocol that drives it, or just say, hey, what do you guys think about this? You know, that
Mm-hmm.
can easily divulge into chaos.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
and if you have a protocol which says, you know, first, for example, we're gonna have a Socratic discussion, we're gonna have a big kind of question. Here's a text that's gonna illuminate this issue, and we're gonna hear it from both sides. And your job is to critique the text. Your job is not to attack each other. Your job is to critique a text. Now, all of a sudden, people aren't just sharing opinions about, but I heard and I don't like this. You know,
Right.
we're going to look in the text, and it's going to highlight personal feelings that we have, but by us looking at the text and be able to talk about the authors of that and whether we agree or disagree, and here are some norms to guide it, and here's the actual protocol for the way to go through it. Well, now all of a sudden, we're building that safe place, and it's like, look, it's not just about us saying, like, as teachers, like, this is a happy, harmonious place. Like, let's all sing Kumbaya and Butterfly. It's like, it doesn't exist that way. Like, you got to introduce some structure. So these are some of the
For
things,
sure.
as you know, as a teacher, right? So
Yeah. You can wish that all you want, but
yeah, well, I did wish that, you know, initially, and I thought it was just going to be like magical and harmonious. And I thought, just because I'm a happy, positive person, everything's going to work out.
Right. Yeah. How'd it go?
It did. Yeah, it went on. I had definitely a lot of nights where I was, you know, putting my hand on my head and drinking some alcoholic beverages.
So, I mean, I want to dig into that just a little bit. So this is a really big place of passion for me. Like this concept of creating psychological safety within teams, within schools, within classrooms, within relationships, right, is a big thing. And we're seeing it pop up more and more over the past year and a half with COVID and the other things that have happened. We're recognizing that this side of, I guess you could put it under the SEL umbrella, right? This would be under the social emotional learning concept, but psychological safety is kind of the foundation for all these other deep learning things to take place and to have hard conversations. And so when I go in and work with schools and people and do like this training on what psychological safety looks like, very often there is kind of a product of the conversation. And like you were saying, the parameters, like we will always assume the best intention of the other one. This is what that looks like. Or, you know, that here's the 5 rules that guide our conversation. And like, if you were to kind of inform like, hey, here's some of those parameters that we would give, what would be some of your suggestions of a parameter that you would write?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the things you're mentioning, and I don't know, this is probably universal for a lot of people who do these trainings, but Adaptive Schools, you know, does a training. It's the 6 or 7 P's, right? You know, pursue positive intentions, paraphrase, and so these whole, you know, kind of P's dictate, you know, how people interact with each other. So it doesn't necessarily matter what it is. I think it is great to co-construct those with a group, you know, together.
Oh, for sure.
We probably do that as well. Is to talk about, hey, what's going to make this a great, you know, meeting? What's just going to make this a great session? When we're working with your team, what makes a great team? Like, let's explore those together and put those. But it doesn't necessarily matter what they are. I think presuming positive attention is a great one. And it needs to be specific too, because some people will say like, be collaborative, or be respectful. And nobody knows what that means,
No. Yeah, it's different for everyone. I was respectful. What are you saying?
Yeah,
Like,
I was very respectful. I mean, I disagreed completely. Well, you kind of raised your voice a little bit, like is that part
in
of
a respectful way. So it's
yeah,
fine.
but I do in a respectful voice. It's like, yeah, like we need to kind of define that. If you can
Right.
co-construct with the group, it becomes more powerful. And sometimes you might start with, a few of those particular norms and how to interact with each other and how to build trust, and then build off of those and more clearly define them. But that's what week 1, week 2 of school. That's usually probably when you work with the school. When I work with the school, that's the first couple meetings. It's like, let's really get to know each other and let's really establish, create a safe space. Because they say if you do that, especially as teaching, I know you do that in the first week, you're set for the rest of the year. If you don't do it, then you're on an uphill battle.
For sure. Yeah, because they've already started to, engage in a certain way, and then you're having to modify behavior instead of like setting the tone for behavior from the very beginning, which is much more challenging. But I agree that the need to co-construct those goals, and whoever you're like, we would co-construct them with 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, right? It's always a conversation. Whoever the audience is, it can be co-constructed. So that's definitely, a high priority when setting up those types of things. But in my opinion, in my experience, this conversation right here, like you were saying, it happens in the first week of school because it's foundational to everything that happens. It kind of sets the tone for the projects and for how your students engage and how deep they can get and the questions that they're willing to ask, because when they have this sense of belonging and safety and that they're valued and that they can be respectful and know what it looks like for others to be respectful to them, then, they feel safe. They work in their upper brain instead of their their downstairs brain, and they're more likely to engage and retain information. I mean, so to me, all the other things are kind of like icing on top of, if we can get this, then imagine all the other things that are possible from this space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely agree with all that. Create that safe, sensitive feeling where everybody feels valued and heard, and the rest becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we kind of touched on all the different pieces. There's so many different rabbit holes and trails to kind of go down when you're talking about PBL, like the mindset pieces and the depth of the deep learning and different types of experiences and all that. And so I love the conversation. I feel like it could just go on and on and on. I mean, in your world, it does, right?
Yeah, it does. And everyone's at a different place. And I think one of the things that you started with yesterday is you say, do you just want to talk about PBL, or can we talk about something deeper? And I highlight the fact that you asked that, because people look at the kind of shiny object here, PBL, whatever that is. They don't see what's happening underneath.
Right.
And way more important to have the conversation about what's happening underneath, because all teachers can align on that. That's really what we're trying to get to. Student agency, students taking ownership of their learning, addressing real community problems, and civic and community engagement, collaborating and working with each other. And these are all the things all teachers want to get to. Project just happens to be kind of the vehicle that drives it.
Right. Yes. And I love that, because if you can agree on like your whys, then the vehicle you get to get there becomes a little bit less, I don't want to say valuable, but you're more likely everybody to kind of jump on the vehicle if you agree on the whys that are going to get you to that place that you're going.
Yeah, I would start that with any training I do. I say, let's not even talk about PBL. Let's talk about like, what does ideal, what do you want to see in your classroom, like from your learners, and then we could discuss ways to get there.
Yeah, and one piece on that is sometimes I find that like directors or educators aren't able to say like specifically, this is what I want. So another question that I would ask would be like, what does it feel like? How does it feel when you walk in, right? And they're able to kind of describe that. Like, I feel this, I feel that. And then being able to dig into, how do we create that feeling for you? And so often, almost every single time, however we get there, we always kind of end up at the same place. Like, I want the students to have a sense of belonging and safety and relationships and blah, blah. And, that's always seems to be the foundation in all these conversations. And it's universal, as I've found in my conversations. So I think that's just a really cool thing to see. So where can people find you, hang out with you, do the things that you do, learn more about all this?
Yeah, they can come over here to San Diego. I'm here. I got a free day. I'm going to the beach, so come over here. No, um, LinkedIn. I'm pretty active now on LinkedIn, so that's a way to get in touch with me. Especially, I think if it's a leadership position, because there's a lot of people within leadership, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a good way to connect. And if you connect with me there, I'll instantly accept your friend request. And hopefully, be putting out some content that's relevant to what you're looking for. Twitter, as we all know, I mean, that's every educator and their mother is on Twitter, and nobody else is on Twitter.
Yeah, right. I know. It is. It's overflowing.
It's overflowing. And actually, you said
Yeah.
this way to connect. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it. It's just sometimes there's too much going on there. But
Yeah.
I'm on there. And I'd say in email, if you really have some specific kind of questions, just reach out to me. Email Kyle Wagner at transformschool.com. And if you want to find out a little bit more about kind of the way I work with schools, you can go to transformschool.com and see some of the things that I do and some of the people in schools I serve.
Transform. Because you do kind of trainings, but you also do like full on coaching and those types of things with schools, right?
Yep. So, for example, even this morning I just did a training with a bunch of teachers in Guatemala. So it could look at trainings and getting kind of the basics to be able to design a cohesive project-based experience to coaching on the implementation of it from the leadership perspective and also from the teacher's perspective, and then also to what community engagement looks like as well. So kind of three pieces within the classroom, within a kind of school leadership level, and within community.
Well, cool. I love the work that you're doing. It's amazing. So, to everybody hanging out with us now and everybody watching on the replay later, definitely connect with Kyle. Find him on LinkedIn or wherever you are, Twitter if you're an educator, because that's the only people there apparently. So definitely connect with him because he's doing some cool work. And, if you see him at the beach in San Diego, go say hey before he goes back to Hong Kong. So thank you, Kyle, so much for having this conversation with me. I really love kind of getting into the deeper pieces of PBL and why it's valuable and for learners' lives and all of those types of things. Love that conversation. So thank you for having it with me.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. And just one quick typo: it's transformschool.com. There's no S at the end.
No S. I
No S.
tried. I was so close. I don't know where that'll take you, but not to Kyle's site.
I'm amazed you're able to do all of this at once. I actually had to maximize my screen just so I'm looking at you because I was like, oh my God, there's chat windows and everything going on. Like, I don't know how she does it.
Too many things happening. The first couple times I was like, but I'm a little bit better now. So it's fine. Well, thank you guys. We will see you next week on What Could Go Wrong. Connect with Kyle and go change the world.
Yeah.